Well, hello everyone. It's wonderful to be able to connect again with you. It's been a little bit of time since I presented, and I apologize for that. I encountered some illness that I kind of had to work through, and I am very grateful to say that I was able to work through it, and am feeling much better, and am able to resume these presentations on the Tao of Joy every day, um, which I sincerely hope is helpful to many of you, even though um, I know it's certainly helpful to me to do them. It helps me gain a better understanding of the things that Derek wrote about in this wonderful book. And I hope that maybe my take on it, though I don't claim any special spiritual knowledge or anything, but just having studied Derek's books, I know that what he teaches every Sunday, not only in this book and in his other books and in his weekly presentations, have been of tremendous benefit to me. It helps me go through the struggles of life and get meaning from them and try to get a little better at living. And that's a lot about what today's presentation is about. It's about true mastery. And of course, though it's not said specifically in the title, what Derek is talking about is true mastery of the Tao. People who cultivate the Tao at a high level and are able to basically have obtained true mastery. Now, I can't claim to be someone who has true mastery 24/7. I can say maybe I've had some moments of true mastery, maybe even maybe even an hour or two at times, but it's as will be stated in this presentation, true mastery, when you break it down, it really is quite simple. However, doing it can prove kind of challenging sometimes to us, and that's okay. I'm sure most, if not all of us, are works in progress, doing our best to obtain true mastery of the Tao, because it makes, not only because it makes life worth living, but because it really is the best way to live. And so day 48 is today's presentation, True Mastery, and the subtitle I chose is Do What We Do. If I'd had more room, I might have said do whatever we're doing when we're doing it, because that really is the simplest definition of true mastery, to focus on the thing that you're doing, to do it well. And of course, as I alluded to just a moment ago, it's sometimes easier said than done. But before we get into that, I'd like to do a review of day 47, which was entitled The Unseen. And I talked a little bit about things in a Western context. I brought up doubting Thomas from the Christian story, where when the other apostles came to him and said, "Hey, Jesus is risen," he was like, "Yeah, I'll believe that when I see it, when I stick my hands in his wounds," and so forth. And then, of course, as the story goes, he gets to do that, and in seeing, he believes it. And the reference I wanted to, or the point that I wanted to make, was that really the deeper level of that story is kind of about skepticism. Not to say that skepticism is bad. It's useful, very useful, for evaluating reality in both physical and non-physical ways. Obviously, in science, you engage in physical observation, and to know how certain things work, or at least know to a high degree of certainty. In many ways, science is about a way of managing uncertainty, because in science, nothing is completely certain. In a way, when you cultivate spirituality at a high level, it's odd, because to you, as you cultivate it, it's revealed to you, it becomes highly knowable through intuition. But yet, at the same time, I could never prove it to another person in a scientific way. It's something that has to be revealed. And that is because it is unseen, actually. And so skepticism is not that it's a bad thing. It's very useful. We see it in science. But in a way, we have to acknowledge it only takes you so far. I mean, when you think about scientific ideas, many of them hold for hundreds of years until some new consequence comes up and you realize, oh, wait a minute, you know what, if you think about this, wait a minute, maybe this isn't as true as we thought it would be. Or it's only true under these conditions. If we inject or encounter these other conditions, it may not be true. And that's the thing about faith. It's faith in the unseen. And for me, of course, the unseen is the great Tao, despite the fact that there are many world traditions, religious traditions, or even secular traditions that may be a different take on the specifics, but they're all sort of niggling at this fundamental theme of the great unseen spirituality. And once you know that, and I think I mean, for me, it matters in how you do it. To me, certainly Taoism to me is the best non-dogmatic way of doing it, and it works in both it can work in both the secular context and a non-secular context if you want. But to me, it's the best way of doing it. And the key to it is it's invoking your intuition. It's your intuition that allows things to be revealed, where you sort of know something in a deep way without having sort of the maybe like the level of proof that you would have, say, in geometry, right? When you're explaining every piece of knowledge that you have through some other piece of knowledge. It's not like that. Intuition is different. It is knowing the unseen in a way that's not readily demonstratable. So skepticism, of course, is very useful, but when it comes to connecting with the spiritual realm or spiritual truth, that has to be revealed. And that was the point that I tried to make a few weeks ago when we covered this. And so, of course, the Tao created everything, as everything arose from it, and regardless of whether you call it Tao or you personify it as, an unmoved mover or a god that created everything, regardless of how you relate to it, it can't be seen, and yet whatever that perception is to you, to us, obviously, it's the great Tao. We know that it gave rise to everything, that formless thing that gave rise to all form, but we can't see it, and so we have to sort of trust our intuitions when we feel it. And of course, as with anything that you're connecting to or learning about or experiencing in real time, it takes time, no pun intended, to connect to it, as well as discipline, setting aside time to spend time connecting and to trying to your best to understand it. And of course, as we've discussed many times before, and this theme will come up again today in today's topic in day 48, calmness is the first step to preparing for feeling it. That calmness is the sort of the empty stage that has to be set before we can encounter sort of the material of what goes on the stage, so to speak. And then, of course, awareness arises quite naturally. And by awareness, I mean both in a physical sense and a non-physical sense, because obviously you can be aware of what's going on physically in the world, but also, too, there's a world, though it doesn't give itself up readily to description sometimes, there is a world of ideas and feelings and sort of non-physical things that in themselves, even though they're not tangible, they're still just as real. So just as you may pet a family pet, a dog or a cat, and you feel that softness and that connection in a real sense, that's a physical aspect of feeling all that. And there's a real sort of physical emotions that are biological and so forth that all come into play there. But at the same time, it's also the experience of loving another being. Because anyone who's had a pet, whether you're a cat or a dog person or a fish or whatever may be your connection in that sense, if you are an animal lover, there is a realness to feeling that connection to another being and caring for it and having compassion for it and wanting goodness for it, and it in turn feeling the same way about you. Because even though animals don't necessarily, as far as we know, probably operate at a high level of intelligence the way human beings do, certainly they feel, certainly they experience pain and suffering, and also good feelings of love and so forth. And how do I know that? Well, I know that because I've spent time with beings that are non-human, and you can see and feel and experience that they have all those higher qualities. And so, but anyways, getting back to my point, awareness after you cultivate calmness does in fact arise quite naturally. And then of course, once you have that awareness, it becomes easier to connect to it. It becomes more tangible. But it will always be, to some degree, I think, as long as we're living inside a body, in this existence that we find ourselves in, it'll always be a matter to some degree of faith. The intuition, although you, from inside yourself, you know it inside out, you know that it's right, you trust it. I can't expect someone else to experience it the way I do, to the point where they know it 100%. And nor could they, in turn, do the same for me for what they know intuitively, however they relate to it. And that is sort of an interesting paradigm that exists, but it does in fact exist that way to me. But taking a leap of faith, I would suggest there's nothing wrong with doing that. And so, bringing up to my third point, the leap of faith is in fact worth taking. There's nothing wrong with being skeptical. However, we have to acknowledge that skepticism has its limits. At some point, we have to cultivate our intuitions. And this theme, again, will come up today, because I'll try to make a point about how we humans tend to complicate simple things. And almost any idea, if you wanted to, you could really start pushing questions to the point where you get so muddled and confused that you've lost sight and forgot the question. Anyone who engages in thinking about subjects, I guess they don't even have to be difficult subjects, but particularly with difficult subjects, you can easily tie yourself into knots if you overthink something. And at some point, you have to accept some underlying truth. And I think often, at the heart of everything, there is a spiritual truth underneath. And some people don't trust it because, as I said, it's not provable in a scientific way. But there is a truth there that we can know through an experiential way, through intuition, so to speak. So there's nothing wrong with being skeptical. However, we must acknowledge that skepticism has its limits. And at some point, we have to be willing to start cultivating our intuition, to trust our intuitions to some degree. And of course, I specifically brought up the story of The Happiness of the Fish from Derek's book, and I read from it, and I probably butchered the pronunciation a bit, so I apologize about that. But it speaks of a different kind of knowing that goes beyond simple materialism. And I talked about my evolution and understanding the story because long before Derek published his book, he had told the story in a meeting, and I remember he first told it, and the skeptical part of myself, which isn't a bad part of myself, I think it's helpful to be skeptical, especially depending on what each of us face in our lives. But at the same time, I remember thinking, this story just doesn't, I don't understand. What if the question of, how do you know what the fish feel would have been phrased in a more rigorous way, as to avoid this idea of, well, you knew that I already knew. And of course, it took me years, frankly, to work through this actually very simple story in a way. It's simple once you get it. But if you think about it, the story really isn't about semantic language or double talk. It's about knowing through intuition, knowing through the experience and feel of things. And there's a degree of faith always in that, of course. But it is a very real way of knowing. And once you know it deeply. And I don't think you can be convinced otherwise once you've truly experienced it, once you've accepted your intuitions and they've been revealed to you. And however the great Tao or whatever way people relate to it, once it's revealed to you that way, it becomes very real, very tangible, and very powerful way of moving through your life. And it helps make life worth living. So I did spend a little bit of time on this review, but it's mainly because this idea of the unseen really does sort of feed into day 48, which is a course entitled True Mastery. And basically the point I'd like to make is when it comes right down to it, there really is nothing complicated about what we humans do. When thinking about it and trying to narrow it down to very simple things, what I came up with was a simple sentence: we work or play, we sleep, and we eat. And the reason why I put work or play is this theme kind of came up to me this week. Wendy and I, we go to this class every week. It helps us get information about how to teach our child that has a developmental disability. And the instructor, who's a very nice lady and shares very helpful information with regard to that specific, she talked about how, to children, play is work. And she was so right in how she described that. When they do the things they do, whether it's macro movements of moving things around, or if it's being playful about mimicking what adults do as part of daily life or whatever, there's a form of play to it. And of course, and I brought this up to her and she agreed with me and we had a nice conversation about it. But in a way, it's so true of all life, not just for children, but if you think about it, and this theme has come up before, we've talked about this, in living life, often the trick to being happy at whatever work we engage in, and in a scientific sense, everything we do physically is in fact a form of work. But if you look at it in terms of where the joy in the actual doing is, that work can actually become play, which is why I added this part that Derek didn't specifically mention it in the chapter, is we work or play. And I almost think those words, if you can cultivate at a high level, are interchangeable. The real work of using our energy to move through our lives, I think when we cultivate at a high level, we find the joy, and the work actually can become play. And I truly believe that. And I think, it's why, some people have a job where other people go, God, if I did that, I wouldn't be able to do that work. And someone else does that work, and actually, as terrible as it may seem to person A, to that person, it's wonderful. They enjoy it. They enjoy doing it. They derive meaning from it. It's fun to do it, even though someone else may feel differently. And instead, they find the fun in some other task. And I think to some degree, people who cultivate spirituality at a high level can kind of find the fun in everything that has to be done in life that we encounter as we move through it. Now, getting back to true mastery. So the work or the play, and we sleep, of course, we have to sleep. If you didn't sleep, you'd eventually die or go crazy, right? You have to eat. If you didn't eat, we'd die, and we can fold drinking into that as well. So it really, in a sense, what I'm saying is we work, we play, we sleep, and we eat. Life really is quite simple. But the thing is, what we do is, as humans, we perceive complication, and then, of course, we bring that complication often to fluidity. We make things more complex than they have to be. And it's interesting to me that when great advancements are made in science, there's always a simplification that happens at the top. So you've taken these complex steps to get somewhere, and then someone steps back and goes, hey, what about this? And then it's a way of sort of simplifying all those complex steps into a more simple and direct idea. And to me, it's no accident that this happens in science, because the Tao creates everything, right? And even the scientific framework that we live in. And so, what I'm saying, ultimately, my point is this: is that life is simpler than we make it, frankly. And so, if you think about it, how many times do we experience anxiety about the future, or do we fret about the way past events turned out? The reality is we cannot change the past, right? Because we know the reality of the dimension that we live in, this time and space that we all find ourselves in, inside our own bodies, moving through time and space, so to speak. We know the arrow of time only goes forward, right? You never see cream unmixed from coffee. You've never seen an egg unbreak, except on TV and with the reverse camera. But in reality, you can't ever see those things. At least to date, no one has. And so the arrow of time goes in one direction, forward, and we can only live in that one direction. We can't go back and fix what went wrong yesterday in real time. Maybe we can fix the problems that were created by what we did, but we can't fix it in real time. And it's also equally true that the only place to have an impact on the future is, in fact, in the present. You know, it's funny when people say, I often laugh when I hear this phrase, we can't change the past, but we can change the future. And the thought that always comes to mind to me is, if we are going to change the future, what are we going to change it from? You know, from what to what? Realistically, the future is created in the present, and it is only in the present that you can have any impact on the future. So what I'm saying is, regardless of whether we're trapped in the past or stuck in paralysis or anxiety about the future, the reality of it is this moment in front of us that is the one where we can have an impact. And it's the only moment we can have an impact. And often we humans miss it because we complicate it by fretting about the past or being anxious or worried about what's going to transpire in the next minute, hour, week, month, or years. And it's so simple to say, hey, just stop doing that. But of course, it's a difficult thing to do. And so, yet despite this rather simple statement that I've made, that I think we can all pretty much agree about, we all have experienced anxiety about the future. And we've all experienced various regrets about the past, whether they're our fault or not. And it's really hard when you're wrapped in those moments of anxiety or those moments of regret about the past to feel like, how do I stop this? How do I get out of it? How do I move forward? How do I get back to the present? But the reality of it is that present is always there. It's up to us to change the way we look at it, to change our focus, to change where we are. Sometimes I often tell myself, when I find myself drifting either to the past or to the future, I physically tell myself, I recite it in my head, so to speak. And maybe I don't say it out loud, but I say it to myself. I say to myself, stay here. And what I mean is, by that is whatever moment I'm in. If I'm driving down the highway, then stay focused on the driving. If I'm at work doing something, stay focused on the task. If I'm with a friend listening to them tell me about whatever they're talking about, it's to stay there and listen and be present for that person. So those are, just three examples. But ultimately, in everything we do, we have the choice to be there, to really experience it fully. And it is our choice, and our choice alone, really, to be able to do that. And we can do it at any time. That's the good news. We don't have to be locked in anxiety or regret. We can accept the moment for the moment, live in the moment, do the right things at the right times. And the right time, of course, is now. So true mastery is doing the simple things of life, and only those things. In other words, to put it in plain terms, we all have to sleep when we sleep and eat when we eat. And really, everything else that we have to do in life. It comes down to a simple task ultimately, and we have to focus on what we're doing when we're doing it. And so now I'm going to start to sum it up here if I can. There's nothing complicated about true mastery, but let's face it, we humans do in fact complicate the simplest ideas to total complexity. Often we see that this can be done until the subject can ultimately lose all meaning, or we can lose the question sometimes. To me, a good concrete example of this that maybe not everyone's experienced, but probably every parent in the meeting has experienced, or even if you've just had a younger sibling, you've probably experienced this. A good example is when a child pushes the why question until the answer loses all fundamental meaning, not only to the child, but often to the adult trying to push the answer, right? And if you it can be very frustrating when you're in it, but when you step back, it can actually be very humorous when you realize what's going on. And in a real sense, we all sometimes can be that childish about things. I mean, we disguise it in high-minded subject matter sometimes, or in debates or whatever, but often this is what's going on. We're pushing things to the point where all meaning is lost, and that's a good sign that we're just being too complex, to be frank. Especially for the simplicity of what it takes to live life happily. We don't have to make it that complex, and we shouldn't. Now, doing what we do and only focusing on that is, of course, easier said than done. And as I said, when we're worried about the future, it can be very hard to stop. And when we experience and feel regrets about the past, regardless of whether they're things that are our fault, I mean, sometimes just bad things happen. As Bill says, the Tao reigns and the sun shines on the good and the bad. It's indiscriminate, really. It can be very difficult to let that go sometimes, the past. And it can also be very difficult to let go of the worry about or the fretting about the future as well. The key, as with almost all teachings, Tao teachings to me, is to cultivate calmness, awareness, and connection first. Those themes, those three words really do keep coming back. Because when we calm ourselves, we're sort of preparing our internal state to be ready to live our lives simply and fully. That's sort of the calmness I think of as the fabric in which we operate, in which the action of our life has to be conducted in. And then, of course, awareness is the tool that allows us to understand and know what is actually going on. And of course, that can be, as I said, both there's a physical aspect to that reality, but there's also a reality that's not so physical. Ideas, feelings, metaphysical things that aren't tangible, so to speak, but that are nonetheless very real. And that's really what cultivating awareness is. Not just about the physical, but the physical too, but also the metaphysical, so to speak. So if we diligently work to cultivate the virtues of calmness, awareness, and connection, we will in fact connect to the great Tao, that great unseen that we talked about last week. And we will be able to eat when we eat and sleep when we sleep. And we'll also be able to simply do all the things in between those simple tasks as well. And so that's really sort of the message of today's presentation, to truly master the living. It's just to do what we do when we need to do it. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And so, as always, I want to interject this new piece, the Tao of Daily Life, the story of the water pump. Donating anonymously to a charitable organization is a great way to jumpstart the karmic mechanism. The water pump, a story from the Tao of Daily Life, beautifully illustrates the karmic laws of giving and receiving. And let me just say, it doesn't have to be monetary either. There's all kinds of ways to give of yourself. It doesn't have to be monetary, but this does. I wanted to put this in as just a reminder, a gentle reminder. And so the Tao of Joy Every Day, a great book to use daily to help one study and learn the Tao teachings and put them into action. I know it's made an impact in my life, as has all of Derek's teachings and the time that he devotes to spreading the word of the Tao. I'm so thankful that he's done that, and Bill too, of course, for the years that he did it, and does do it still, as we had a wonderful presentation from him a short time ago. And so there it was, day 48, True Mastery, Do What We Do. Thank you all for giving me the opportunity to share and speak with you this morning. I hope I said something that was helpful, and I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday.
Thank you, Alex. That was wonderful. You've touched on quite a few themes, quite a few topics that are going to be focus areas for me as well today. So when it comes to simplicity and complexity, when it comes to present moment awareness, these are certainly focus areas in my talk today as well. I think we'll work our way to those topics before the end of the meeting today. So one thing that Alex mentioned a little earlier was about being a skeptic. So just to kind of fess up to everybody, it may not be obvious, but both Alex and myself are hardcore skeptics, and we admit as much. We tend to question everything. And as we read up on literature in skeptical, rational thinking, we also, each one of us knows other people who think the same way as well. However, just so everyone knows, a lot of these other people who consider themselves hardcore skeptics also, they definitely don't realize the limitation of skepticism. So in that respect, Alex and myself are quite different from them. There's a certain point to which we can discuss skeptical thinking with them, but then there comes a sort of a boundary beyond which they will not tread. So, and that's kind of where we are today. So another thing that Alex talked about is the overall message of this particular chapter from the Tao of Joy Every Day is about the extraordinary Tao that is in the most ordinary, everyday things. So that is the overall message of that chapter. And on that note, I have a message for everyone as well. And the message is, you may think you are nobody special. You may think your life is ordinary. Well, I'm here to tell you the extraordinary Tao is embedded in what you think of as nothing special, so that indeed you are unbelievably special. Now, what you do with your specialness is completely up to you. Most people do nothing with their own unique brand of specialness throughout their entire lives. So as I head into my presentation, I'm going to be keeping that in mind and then reminding you to be one with the extraordinary Tao within you.